So everybody, thanks so much for listening. We have a returning guest. Yeah, ooh, let's. Oh, that's a fumble. We'll start over again. Everybody, thanks so much for listening. We have a returning guest, Dr. Mary Talley Bowden, here on the program. ENT. She stood up for not just me, but everybody around the country against the FDA and also against the Texas Medical Board to help thousands of patients during COVID-19. You can follow Dr. Bowden at MD Breathe on Twitter. She does have a podcast out. It is America Out Loud Pulse. It's Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern time. Definitely check her podcast out on any of your podcasting platforms. Again, America Out Loud Pulse, Monday at 5 p.m. It is breathemd.org if you want to see her as a patient, and it is americansforhealthfreedom.org. It's an organization that she made up to make sure politicians take the pledge to stand up for medical freedom around our country. I just want to, say this at the beginning for people listening and watching this program. Dr. Bowden is not practicing medicine on here. Check with your local doctor, your own doctor, for help and more information. We just want to make that out and clear so we don't get censored or in trouble with any of the people here. So Dr. Bowden, with all that, thanks so much for coming on. Greatly appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rob. Love being here.
It's always a pleasure to see your face. And I'll tell you, I did watch this podcast you did with Dr. Jack Kruse, who I never heard of until I watched that podcast with you and Callie Means. And you really gave Callie Means hell. We'll get into that in just a second. But thank you so much for introducing me to Dr. Jack Kruse. Listen to many of his podcasts now as well. And he is a real inspiration to people that are fighting for medical freedom as well as you are. I want to ask you this because you had this big fight that's still going on with the Texas Medical Board. Can you give the audience a little bit of an update about what's going on with your case right now? Because they just keep dragging you through the mud. I went on Google. They still have the cases. The clips that you're misinformation, you're this, you're that, you're Satan. The list goes on and on. So give us a little update about what the heck is going on with that case.
Yeah, it's been 3.5 years now. There have been 3 continuances. They've had to drop 2 of their charges. They've had to drop their 2 expert witnesses because they can't find anybody to testify against me. They paid 2 witnesses $30,000, and both of them bowed out at the last minute. So they have no one to testify against me. Their latest move is to ask for summary judgment. And so we're waiting on that decision. Summary judgment basically means that the judge decides without giving me a hearing. So they don't want this public because they know, if it goes public, then it makes them look really bad. The evidence that we presented is super clear. I was working under a court order. They're acting like I just barged into the hospital and tried to give a man ivermectin, which is not the case whatsoever. And as it stands now, the hearing is the very end of April. So we'll see what happens, what the judges decide.
It's truly crazy what they've done to you. They've really dragged your reputation through the mud, and you've went through hell the past 3 years and even beyond now. And they tried to milk you dry, making you pay for lawyers. I'm grateful that your lawyers are doing pro bono now because it's really despicable, the stuff that went on with you and many other doctors that were really trying to help people throughout the past 4 years and beyond, because you still are helping people, as I alluded to in the introduction. I want to go a little deeper into how you're helping people. So, are you still seeing a lot of people with COVID-19 issues and also injuries / long COVID issues?
It's definitely slowed down, but I still, I definitely still here and there, maybe once or twice a week now, see patients that have continuing issues either. Well, it's very muddy now because we don't know what's long COVID and what's from the COVID shot because most everybody has had both, right, at this point. So, but yeah, definitely still seeing it, still having problems getting ivermectin. That's very frustrating. I was one of the doctors that sued ivermectin, and we won. And basically, the FDA had to take down all the misinformation that they put out on the web, on the internet about ivermectin. And yet, really didn't do much good, unfortunately, because we still have pharmacists blocking my prescriptions. And my big push now, I just think we need to make ivermectin over the counter. I think that's the only way to get around this. I did a poll on Twitter, and about 25,000 people responded. And I asked them, where do you get your ivermectin? 52% of people responded they get it from the Tractor Supply. So people are getting the animal version. They're resorting to that, which, from what I can tell, it's okay. I'm not seeing a lot of issues with that, but still, I mean, this is America. We should be able to get the human version of ivermectin. And I just think the only option at this point is to make it over the counter. And Arkansas just filed a bill. Senator Alan Carter filed a bill to make ivermectin over the counter. It is over the counter already in Tennessee, although I have heard mixed messages on that. Like, it may be a little bit, it's not being carried in CVS and Walgreens, right? You still have to find a pharmacy that carries it. But I just think it's so safe. I mean, it is absolutely safer than Tylenol. It's safer than Advil. It's safer than any of the antibiotics I prescribe. And people should not have to resort to either ordering it from Mexico or India or getting it from the feed store.
Well, I actually interviewed a woman who her husband was taking hydroxychloroquine early on in April of 2020, and he got better lickety split. I know we're talking about ivermectin, but, hydroxychloroquine also got the bad name, just like ivermectin did, due to Donald Trump talking about hydroxychloroquine as a therapeutic back in early 2020. So again, because people hate the orange man, again, whether you like him or not, but because people hate him, they're going to ban drugs because they wanted people to take a jab that we know what happened to many people after they took that jab. And we'll leave that there. I want to go a little deeper into this because, you've helped a lot of people with this. What kind of symptoms are you still seeing? Again, whether it's long COVID, whether it's injuries from the jab, whatever it may be, is it consistent? Is it neurological? Is it myocarditis? What are you seeing with people that come in and see you particularly?
Right. Well, I see people with neurological, definitely. So tremors or issue, the $1 million workup, all sorts of imaging studies, can't figure out why they're having these issues. And their other doctors are putting them on psychiatric medications, sleeping pills, that sort of thing.
Well, they tried to do that with me, Doc, and I didn't play that game. I'm just saying.
Yeah, exactly. And then I bet they didn't report you to VAERS, because what I have found is none of the other doctors have reported these patients to VAERS, even though they were previously healthy, sudden onset of symptoms that coincided with getting these shots. There's no other explanation found. So by default, it has to be the COVID shots, or you should at least report it so that our trusty government can dig into it further. But that's not what's happening. I have had to report everybody. Yeah, so neurological, I've seen strange rashes that don't respond to steroids or even the higher power biologics like Xolair, that sort of thing. I see fatigue and just sort of just general, just real malaise, and brain fog is big too. And typically what I do is, I try to keep it simple because there's so much out there. And I do blood work and I check their COVID antibody levels, and their antibody levels are sky high. It's definitely different than the people that have not had the shots. It's a little bit muddy because we don't have a direct test for the spike protein, but we can infer that when the COVID antibody level is super high, that the body is still producing spike protein, or there's spike protein in the body, and that's what the antibody level is reacting to. So I typically start with that. And then I have had success giving people ivermectin and watching those numbers go down and watching their symptoms go down. So that's typically how I start, but there's more, it can get more complicated.
Yeah. And I think it's important. Again, we are not practicing medicine here. You should, if you want an appointment with Dr. Mary, go to, again, breathemd.org. and find more information about her here. You can you can set up an appointment. We are not practicing medicine here. We don't want to get in trouble with any organization, whether it's YouTube or a podcasting site or radio, whatever it may be. I do want to continue on because, we kind of went into that, but I know you brought up the ivermectin bill in Arkansas and how that just came out. We also are seeing 8 states that have legislation to get rid of the mRNA shots. And let's start there. What is your opinion of how these are going to go? I know you talked about Tennessee and what happened with the ivermectin, that it's out there, but it's not. It's a mixed bag. Do you see the same coming out of Arkansas as well? And also, when you finish that, dabble into those 8 states trying to get rid of the mRNA shots.
Yeah, it's encouraging that we even have legislation on the books about it at all. And I don't know the climate in these other states, but I can speak to Texas. And so I do know that there is one legislator, Representative Wes Verdell, who's new. He was just elected this year. I helped him. Our organization, Americans for Health Freedom, backed him heavily because he was one of the politicians that said that he thinks that the COVID shot should be pulled off the market. So, in Texas, the Republican party is very contentious. So it's very divided. And so, unfortunately, the Republicans that I like are in the minority. So I don't know that it's going to happen, but all we can do is just keep fighting. I do think social media is effective. I'm kind of, I've been blasted so much, I don't really care anymore if somebody says something bad, but that's not the case with a lot of politicians. So you can make some headway on social media by confronting them publicly, and they are elected to represent us. And if we can be loud on social media, we can also contact them, email them, call them, then we may stand a chance of getting some of these bills passed. I'm not optimistic in Texas, but who knows, maybe. The other states, it's hard for me to comment because I just don't know the climate there.
Dr. Mary Talley Bowden here. It is at BreatheMD. The podcast is on America Out Loud Pulse. Definitely check it out at your podcast place where you get them. It is Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern time. That's when our podcast comes out. Americans for Healthfreedom.org is the organization that she just spoke about. And then if you want to see her as a patient, speak to her there, it is breathemd.org. I want to kind of continue on Texas since you dabbled into that, Dr. Mary. Senator Bob Hall, has been doing a lot against the mandates. Has he been someone you've been speaking to also about trying to push the envelope on the mRNA shots?
Yeah, we haven't spoken about it recently. He is one of the people, he's the only senator in Texas that has signed the pledge calling for the COVID shots to be pulled off the market. And, he's kind of seen as a renegade from what I understand. But that's great. I mean, he's my favorite of all of them. He's, he doesn't mince words. He says what needs to be said. He doesn't worry about the political backlash, but he does very well politically. So I hope more politicians will take a lead from him. And, he's just very plain spoken, common sense. And he's been backing us from the start of the pandemic. He's one of the few.
But that Ken Paxton lawsuit against Pfizer is still going on, correct?
I haven't looked into that recently. I'm not sure. I assume so.
Okay, yeah, because I know he dabbled into that. I know he's been vehemently against all the nonsense that went on with the jabs, which is good because, again, he's probably the top person in Texas government that's actually fighting against this, along probably with Senator Hall, as you stated, Doc. We do see other states around the country, as we've talked about Arkansas, but also the other 8 states that are looking against banning the jabs. The Florida grand jury came out and said, and I just want to read this correctly, that it is deceptive of behavior in that it straddles the line between ethical and unethical conduct, but they could not find criminal activity with the COVID-19 vaccines. So a little bit of a disappointment there for Governor DeSantis, who has been pushing against that throughout his presidential campaign back in 2023, 2024. He's been a little bit silent now, but we do have a good Surgeon General that is still pushing against that in, Dr. Joseph Ladapo. Obviously, he didn't get into the Trump administration, a little upset about that. But with that, in Kansas, with their Pfizer lawsuit as well, with Chris Kobach, their attorney general, it seems like, and maybe you agree with this, maybe you don't, Doc, that things are progressing forward. Again, it's inching, it's not leaps and bounds forward.
Inching very slowly. Right. And I don't know if you saw who Trump just appointed to the head of the pandemic response team in the White House. That's very discouraging. That's a doctor out of Texas. I think his last name is Parker, Gerald Parker. And he works at Texas A&M. But if you go through his X account, he is super into the vaccine. He's got this One World Health thing behind him. It sounds like he wants to reconsider our withdrawal from the WHO. So it's things like that that makes me just wonder if, I don't know that we can make progress on a federal level at this point. I mean, I think it's going to have to be state by state, county by county. I talked to two people in California last week, Ronald Owens and Julie Threet, very active locally, and they are just going from county to county, talking at the, they call them the Board of Supervisors, but other places, this like the county commissioner's court, and just testifying and just pounding away county by county. Same thing in Idaho. Idaho has managed to get the COVID shots banned in several counties who are under the jurisdiction of a health district. And that health district has withdrawn the COVID shots. And they're no longer giving them to people, which is progress, but like you said, inch by inch.
Well, this is what me and you spoke about many months ago in the primary between Governor DeSantis and also Donald J. Trump, that we were personally worried that, again, Donald J. Trump still pushing the COVID jab. Donald J. Trump still says Operation Warp Speed was a success. Donald J. Trump gets into office and he meets with Larry Ellison, and they're talking about AI and this cancer jab. And it seems like, again, he's not really listening to his base that is vehemently against the COVID jab. And again, we saw this in the primary where he never spoke about it. And the only person that was running that was speaking about this was Ron DeSantis. And now, again, the people get what they vote for. And he's done a lot of good EOs. But again, those EOs, the emergency orders, they're not laws. A Democrat can come in and wipe everything clean, just like what Joe Biden did when he was previously in office. I'm talking about Donald Trump previously being in office. So we're seeing this happen in real time. What we were worried about, you and I and a lot of other people that are in the medical freedom movement, we're worried about. It's happening live and in color.
Yes, I agree. We need, there is some hope. So yesterday I tweeted about the 8 states that are drafting legislation to ban the COVID shots. And two of Trump's biggest supporters, Kat Turd and John Rich, quote tweeted that. So saying they were in full support. We just need to get some of those big names maybe to keep pounding away. And then work at it at a local level, state level. I mean, it's unfortunately, I don't know that we're going to be able to get those COVID shots pulled off the market on a federal level, given Trump's allegiance with them.
Yeah. And again, I voted for Donald Trump. I support a lot what he's done so far, and I support a lot of his agenda. But if we want to be truthful to each other and to the audience, this man is an egomaniac. This man will not come out and say he did something wrong, where other politicians, a lot of them wouldn't do that as well, but a lot would. And he will not do that in Operation Warp Speed or with the COVID jabs, because then he would be saying that, again, he did something wrong. I want to move into the second to last of our two topics and just continue on with speaking about the health picks with Donald J. Trump. I know there was a lot of buzz, rather, I should say, obviously about RFK Jr. He did get through committee. He had to give these, this letter to Senator Cassidy about all these preconditioned things that he was going to do, meet with him monthly, and all this vaccine talk. There was constant vaccine talk throughout this hearing. It was abysmal. It wasn't just the Democrats. It was a couple Republicans that dug in, specifically Senator Cassidy, who is the leader of the committee. And it's really sad that, again, RFK Jr. doesn't want to ban vaccines. He wants to look at the science by people that are objective and find out what's good and what's bad. If it's hurting people, take it off the market. This is something that is legitimate. This is something that a normal person that is not hooked on big pharma money, okay, would be, and I'm sorry, I'm struggling with this because it's just annoying me, but all these people are making off with this big pharma money, and they're just toting the big pharma line. And it's just ranting and raving about onesies by Bernie Sanders, who I used to be particularly fond of, who I voted for in 2016 and 2020. And he's ranting about onesies with some company that, RFK Jr. was involved with, but he's not anymore. He divested from the company. And Elizabeth Warren was acting like a raving maniac. So sorry I went into a rant, but it's just ridiculous. And I'm so happy that I left these people. Again, the Republican Party is not Jesus Christ Superstar. We have our problems with them. But I mean, these people are psycho Satanist people. I'm sorry.
Well, and I think the strongest argument has to be, why are we giving these mRNA, modified synthetic mRNA COVID shots to babies? I mean, that's what the CDC is recommending right now, that all babies get 3 of these shots by the time of 9 months old. It makes no sense. And I mean, I don't know how Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren could defend that. COVID is not a threat now. I mean, we didn't talk about this, but I rarely see COVID infection anymore at all, right? And not in kids at all. And I've never seen a kid have a serious problem with COVID where I thought they were going to have to go to the hospital. There's no reason to be giving these babies these shots. And I don't know how anybody can defend that.
Yeah, it's a cult. It sounded like a cult. Again, whether it's hatred to Donald Trump, which, again, we can agree with him and disagree with him, but we don't call people racist, anti-Semitic, sexist just because we don't agree with their policies. And again, throughout this hearing, everybody's anti-vaccine because you don't particularly agree with them. What happened of freedom of speech? What happened of freedom of thought? These people that was supposed to be against censorship. I mean, we remember this. As a person that grew up as 35 years old, I remember growing up as a Democrat. They used to be for freedom of speech. They used to, and the Republicans that were the ones that were pushing censorship. And again, the tables have turned for the most part in 2020 and beyond, that the Republicans are now pushing freedom of speech, and the Democrats are total for censorship, the medical industrial complex, and the military industrial complex. It's really despicable what's going on. And I just was so mad. I'll tell you, if I was in that room, I would have had to leave, because as a person that's injured, I could not handle all that talk. Vaccine this, vaccine that, vaccines God's greatest gift to the world. I mean, it's just crazy that we've been on this earth for millions of years. Again, for people that believe in Christ, they didn't have vaccines at that time. They just started with vaccines back in the late 1800s, and we lived fine. Yet people died early. It's technology that's brought us back. But you know what? It made us live longer, but it's also technology that's hurt us. We can go to Dr. Jack Cruz for that. But regardless of that, It's really crazy that these people are in this cultish mindset about health. And I want to just top it off and get your opinion on this before we kind of move on to another question. I talked to Dr. McCullough about this and also Dr. Robin Malone, that I'm 35 years old. People believed in their doctors before COVID. I got vaccines. I'm not happy about it now, but I did get it. I did trust my doctor at the time. But there was none of this like cultish behavior. Now we have Bill Gates that's coming down to Florida and other parts around this country trying to push a malaria drug where you get vaccinated by mosquitoes. They're trying to put mRNA in food, whether it's vegetables, whether it's in beef. I mean, what the hell is going on here? As a person like you that's a doctor, would you ever think that it's come to this? That people's mistrust in medicine is at an all-time high and that they're in this cultish transhumanist mindset.
Yeah, it's insane. It's crazy. It's hard for me to wrap my head around. It's hard for me to believe that I'm an outlier. But I have to believe that ultimately we will prevail. I don't think anybody, I think the vast majority of people are rejecting mRNA shots.
Right.
I do think that we have to protect kids because, kids don't have a choice. And if their parents are brainwashed or parents are not getting informed consent, then that's a real problem. Kids don't have any choice. And it's very discouraging, but, hopefully we will rise from the ashes and create a better system going forward. But it seems like just a gigantic hurdle to overcome.
Well, we are grateful for people like you. Again, Dr. Mary Talley Bowden here on the program. It is at MD Breathe on Twitter, at MD Breathe. The podcast is on America Out Loud Pulse. Definitely check her out there on Mondays at 5 p.m. Eastern. You can go to her personal website where if you want to see her as a patient, it is breathemd.org, breathemd.org. And then the organization that she founded is Americans for healthfreedom.org. Last few questions before we get into that big interview on Danny Jones with you, Callie Means, and also the great Dr. Jack Cruz. I will get to that in just a second. But the last few questions on RFK Jr., do you expect him quickly to get confirmed as HHS, right, as the secretary, correct?
Well, I'm not an expert in these matters, but yes, that's my expectations.
What do you hope that he does personally?
Well,
because it seems like he's pretty handcuffed.
I know. I guess, my wish list is get the COVID shots pulled off the market immediately, make ivermectin over the counter. I want the nonprofit hospitals to be scrutinized because I think they are fleecing Americans. I think they're fleecing the tax system based on what I've seen from Houston Methodist Hospital, which has, $13+ billion in assets. A day doesn't go by that I'm not assaulted by their brand, either on radio or a billboard or on TV. They are everywhere. Their CEO, Mark Boom, made over $6 million last year. It's just disgusting. They are obligated to do a portion of their revenue to charity care. But in my mind, it's just not enough to get that nonprofit status. So I really want them to dig into that. And it's not those three issues are my three biggest wishes, but there's a lot more that needs to be done.
I want to go into that interview as our last segment with Callie Means. You and I have done a previous interview a few months back when Callie Means first got into the game and he was on Tucker. He was on Joe Rogan. He kind of rose out of the ashes. And I never heard of this guy before, but everybody that I knew that was a Trump supporter raved about this guy as he was Jesus Christ rising from the ashes. So you went back and forth with him on Twitter for months on end. He was calling you names and going back and forth. Then you finally met him on person. I do hope people that are listening to this for the first time go to the Danny Jones podcast with, again, the great Dr. Mary Talley Bowden and the great Dr. Jack Cruz and listen to them against Callie Means and make up your own mind on who you think is right, who you think is wrong. But what was your impression about him in person? Because again, you guys had been going back and forth online for months.
Well, he's a nice guy. He's very polished. But it was gratifying because I got to ask him directly, why. So he will not go on record to say that the COVID shot should be pulled off the market. So I got to ask him, I said, okay, so you're not getting these shots and you're not going to give them to your kids, and you wouldn't want your dad to get the shots. So who should get these COVID shots? And he couldn't answer. And that was gratifying to confront him on that. Jack was much more direct. It was sort of like good cop, bad cop in a sense. But it was, to
be fair, and just to interject quickly, Doc, he wouldn't let you talk that much. He almost wanted a back and forth with Jack. And when Jack was pushing at him a lot, he kind of would bail out and say, you're talking too much, or you're not being nice. And he would make all these kind of weird talking points to kind of deflect. And then when you were trying to get into the game, he wanted to talk over you. I thought that was a little strange as well, too.
Right, because he didn't like my questions. He did not like my questions. So yeah, that didn't surprise me one bit. But it was gratifying to do it, and I wish we could do more debates like that, just live debates where we're just going back and forth. We don't get that. We debate on Twitter a lot, but it'd be nice to do it in person more often.
And I was really encourage people to listen to that if you haven't on Danny Jones' podcast. Definitely listen to Mary Talley Bowden and also Jack Cruz along with Callie Means going at each other. It was a long podcast. Like I told you before we started, I listened to that 3 times. As a person that's injured, it was very gratifying to hear not only you speaking the truth on the gobbledygook nonsense that happened in the past 4 years and still happening, but also hearing a guy that I had never heard before really speaking truth to power. Because as you stated throughout the conversation, we've talked about this months before you even did this podcast, Callie Means has a lot of power in this Trump administration. He was the reason why RFK Jr. joined forces with President Trump on stage in Arizona, and RFK Jr. left the campaign at that time. They are both friendly with each other. Callie Means has both of their ears. So it is very important that people like you and Dr. Jack Cruz were pushing him hard. And a lot of people are hearing this because, that's how the word is getting out. What do you think the role of Callie Means is in the administration, even though he doesn't have that job?
Yeah, that's interesting. And I got a lot of pushback for that interview from his, I got a call from a very high ranking politician after that. Oh, wow. Yeah. And the politician was very nice, but, he was trying to get me to back off. I think he's very slick. He's polished. He has his talking points. He's articulate.
He's a lobbyist. Let's be real.
Right, exactly. He's a lot. Apparently he grew up near Tucker Carlson. They were neighbors of some sort. And so he had that connection to begin with. His parents were very well connected. And so, he's, when you talk to him, he's very nice and personable, and, there's nothing off-putting about him. So, he's probably just weaseled his way into that position, and, they're just comfortable with him. But, I hear different, I've heard some insiders tell me that he's not as powerful as what we think. So it's hard to know.
But between him and Susie Wiles, and for people listening that don't know who Susie Wiles is, she is Trump's chief of staff. She was a lobbyist at Mercury. I believe Casey Means was as well, too. And obviously, Big Pharma did have some clients that those people did deal with personally. So again, when we see Larry Ellison come on and talk about a cancer vaccine, when we see the person that he put in pandemic response come in there, it seems like things are coming together. Maybe this is not fully Trump bringing these people in. Maybe this has particular influence, with Susie Wiles, who was a lobbyist, along with Callie Means, even though I know you just stated that he might not have as much power as we think he does. But it just is very particular how these people just work at Mercury, and it's a lobbying company, and they have big pharma dollars coming into that company. And now they're in the Trump administration, and all this vaccine stuff is coming back into the fold. It's very strange, in just my opinion.
Right. I mean, that's my whole concern, is this like a misdirection strategy. So they're really working on behalf of big pharma. They're diverting the conversation to food. And meanwhile, the mRNA business goes away. Callie was pretty adamant that that was not the case. But who knows? I mean, I guess we'll find out pretty quickly when we get everybody in position and see what happens, but it's not looking good.
Well, even just to go back to the administration as well, somebody that we haven't spoken about is the Surgeon General, who is the sister-in-law of Mr. Walsh, who is the National Security Advisor now for our country. It's just seemed, and she used to work on Fox News. She was very pro-vaccine during COVID, very for the lockdowns. It's very funny, again, how all these people are coming together. And there's no person like, again, I'm not saying whether you wanted a job or not, but somebody like you, a Dr. McCullough, that has been in this medical freedom space for quite a long time now, that was even looked at. Even somebody like Joseph Ladapo, that was supposed to be looked at the beginning, he didn't get a job. So it's very strange how all these people, again, are coming together, not to beat a dead horse here, but I'm just bringing these people up. What do you think about all the other people that he's put in health positions, whether it's CDC, FDA? I know Jay Bhattacharya is not particularly for the vaccine for people younger, but he is for people older getting it.
Right. I mean, I think it's, like you said, it's frustrating because, I mean, I didn't want a position. It would have been nice to have been considered, though. But
even advising
none of the doctors,
the president.
Right. Well, but the point is, none of the doctors that really put their necks on the line, they really, we sacrificed a lot. I basically put my career in the trash can over this. McCullough, McMalone, Pierre Corey. I mean, many doctors really got punished and are still suffering because of speaking out and fighting back and doing the hard thing. And none of us have been, really connected with the new administration. So that's frustrating. I mean, you see somebody like Callie, who doesn't have a medical degree, hasn't sacrificed anything. And I said to him during the interview, I'm like, you haven't suffered. You don't know, you had an easy COVID pandemic experience. You're not seeing what I'm seeing. You didn't go through what I went through. And maybe if you had, your perspective would be different. But that's what we need. We need people that really suffered and got through this and stood up and fought back. But unfortunately, none of us are really getting heard once again.
Yeah, and I talked to Dr. Robin Malone. He said that Mike Pence, who was basically put in charge by Donald Trump during 2020 to deal with the COVID vaccine, he is the one that's leading the charge against Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And there's all the hit pieces all over the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. I've read these articles on Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and it's particularly all about vaccine, nothing else, particularly all about vaccine. And just to put the exclamation point here on Robert F. Kennedy Jr., because I think this is important too. All the liberals back in the day loved RFK Jr. because of his environmental record, because he cleaned up the Hudson River. I remember when I was really young, back in 2004, when it was Bush against John Kerry. RFK Jr. wrote a big article in Rolling Stone magazine saying that Bush stole the election, going back to the voting machines back in Ohio and the shenanigans there. And the Democrats went with it and they loved it. But now, because their money is on the line, because people like Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Ron Wyden, the list goes on and on, all these people are making millions of dollars from Big Pharma. The tides have turned. Sheldon Whitehouse, who I'm originally from in Rhode Island, he's the senator of Rhode Island. He went to RFK Jr.'s wedding. He was friends and still is friends with RFK Jr., and he voted against him. So these people are not loyal to their own friends, their own people they went to their wedding. They're not loyal to you as a constituent. You could call a million times and they're going to do what the party wants. They're going to do what the money wants, and they don't give a damn about you. And that's the way the cookie crumbles. And we can end there. I do want you to leave the viewers and the listeners with some hope for people such as myself and many other people that are listening or watching this that have long COVID, that have injuries due to what happened in 2020. Give us some hope because, you know, we're trying, we're fighting. I'm doing these shows, whether I get one view, whether I get thousands of views. I don't give a damn because it's all about getting people like you that have been heroes to people like me throughout the pandemic, fighting for us when the politicians didn't have the cojones to stand up and fight. So again, we are grateful to you. So give us some hope as we end the show here.
Well, I will. Like I said earlier, I do see improvements in patients either with long COVID or vaccine injuries. I do see them getting better slowly but surely. It's like our fight inch by inch, but I do see improvements. And in terms of getting things, change, I also encourage people to check out Independent Medical Alliance, which was formerly FLCC, but it's been rebranded so their message across. But I'm part of that organization, and that organization has some good connections in the Trump administration. So we're hoping we can use that to make some headway. So follow Independent Medical Alliance. I'm also on the board of the Vaccine Safety Research Foundation. So if you could follow them, support them. Those are the two organizations that I really trust. And then, of course, my own nonprofit is called Americans for Health Freedom. And our foundational project is just to find politicians that are simply willing to state the COVID shot should be pulled off the market and also will not take donations from Big Pharma. And we have almost 250 elected officials. We've had a lot of candidates, and we've had made some good headway in getting those candidates elected. So, and get loud on social media and work locally, contact your representatives and bug them, harass them. But working locally is probably going to get us more than then federally.
Again, Dr. Mary Talley Bowden is at MD Breathe, on Twitter, at MD Breathe on Twitter. It is breathemd.org if you want to see her practice or see her as a patient. Again, we are not practicing medicine on this program. Do take what we say as a grain of salt and go and see your own doctor. It is AmericansForHealthFreedom.org. That is her organization she just spoke about. We do hope that you listen and subscribe to her podcast. It is America Out Loud Pulse, and our podcast is on Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern. Again, on America Out Loud Pulse, Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern. Dr. Mary Talley Bowden, always a pleasure to see your face and speak to you. You are a true hero to people that are injured, a true hero to people that are fighting long COVID battles. And, we just hope that you keep in the fight, and we do hope that you take down the Texas Medical Board.
Thank you so much, Rob. Always a pleasure.